Claire fed a homeless man who had sauntered into the restaurant she worked at, but a few minutes later, she was shocked when she discovered who the homeless man really was. Claire was really hungry that afternoon when she returned from college and made her way to the restaurant where she worked part-time. She decided to buy herself a meal with the little money she had on her. So she sat at the table and politely asked her colleague Cindy to bring her the menu. Claire was still going through the menu when a dirty-looking homeless old man sauntered into the restaurant looking quite lost. The old man stood in the middle of the restaurant looking around like he didn't even know where he was. Claire's colleagues all acted like they didn't want anything to do with the old man. None of them even made any attempt to come to the old man's aid. They all completely ignored him like he wasn't even there. But not Claire. She completely forgot about her hunger when she realized that the old man clearly needed some help. So she stood up. Whenever to where the old man stood, gently held his hands and roomed to a table where he sat down. Then Claire asked the man what he wanted. The old man could only stood her hungry. So Claire told Cindy to bring the old man a full meal. She paid for the man's meal with the money she had. She would have to make do with water herself. As the old man devoured his meal, Claire attempted to engage him in a conversation. But the old man just stared at her looking confused. Claire was born into a very poor family. They lived in a small old, almost cabin-looking house at the outskirts of the city. Then when Claire was just 6, her father Michael abandoned her mother Angela with 4 children and eloped with his younger lover. With Michael gone, Angela found it very hard to care for her 4 kids alone. She worked very hard doing any odd job she could lay her hands on, just to provide for her family. Claire had always dreamed of going to college, but Angela made it very clear to Claire that she just couldn't afford to see her through college. But Claire wasn't deterred, and she studied really hard in high school. Claire was the textbook example of a child that burned the midnight candle. Luck smiled in Claire as she won a partial scholarship to study in a prestigious college of her choice. Claire chose to study medicine, but due to the fact that the scholarship was only partial, Claire still had to somehow find enough money for her rent, food, and other basic necessities. So she worked part-time as a cleaner in a highbrow school. Then just 2 years later, Angela was diagnosed with clinical heart failure and needed to undergo very expensive surgery to correct the condition. The open heart surgery was estimated to cost up to $18,000. Since Angela just couldn't manage to cough out such a whopping amount of money, she had no choice but to continue managing her condition. Her sickness forced her to stop working, so Angela had to shoulder the responsibilities of taking care of not just herself, but her sick mom and 3 younger siblings. It was a heavy burden on young Claire's shoulders, but she was determined to find a better-paying job to help her family. It wasn't easy, and she basically walked the whole city with her resume in hand after school, going from one office to another looking for a job. Finally, Claire got a higher-paying job as a waitress at a fancy restaurant. The pay wasn't big, but it was still enough to take care of Claire's basic needs and that of her family's as well. Still, Claire had one priority, which was to save enough money for her mom's heart surgery. At this rate, though, it would take a long time. The old man was still eating his full meal and Claire was still sipping her water when Cindy came over and started taunting her about using her money for some dirty old man she didn't know. Most of Claire's other colleagues, who had all crowded near her table to watch the strange old man, joined Cindy in laughing at Claire. Dismayed at her colleagues' antics, Claire stood up angrily and told Cindy off. Is there anything wrong in helping an helpless old man, even if it means missing out on one meal? Claire loudly asked Cindy, but her colleagues continued laughing at her. The restaurant's own rent manager, a 32-year-old self-made young man named Charles, heard the echoing laughter from the kitchen and decided to go have a look. He quietly walked to where his workers were crowded together and still laughing. Then he asked in a quiet but firm tone, "What's going on here?" On sighting their boss, all the workers' laughters immediately died down. Then Cindy stood up, and told her boss what Claire had been up to. Leading a confused old man to a table and getting him a meal, Charles said nothing. He just walked over to the table where Claire was still sitting with the old man and took one look at the old man, who had then finished his meal and was wiping his mouth. "Dad?" Charles shouted. The old man looked up at once, saw Charles, and quickly stood up with a smile on his face. Charles rushed over to the old man and embraced him tightly. Both of them remained in their tight embrace for what seemed like ages. It so happened that the old man named Patrick, who was indeed Charles's father, had been suffering from severe Alzheimer's for a long time. One day, Patrick had just walked away from Charles's home and gotten lost in the maze of the city, wandering from place to place, sleeping rough on the streets and begging for food. And that was how he had wandered into the restaurant. After almost a month of being missing, after a long embrace, Charles ordered all his other workers, who were all watching the unfolding drama dumbfounded, to return to their posts at once. They all dispersed immediately. Then Charles took his dad by the hand and warmly told Claire to follow him to his office. When they got to his office, Charles told Claire about his dad and praised her for the rare act of kindness. Then he asked her to tell him about herself. Claire told Charles everything, from her bitter childhood experiences to her mother's sickness and expensive surgery. Charles really pitied Claire after her emotional story. Then he gave her $1,000 in cash and told her to come back to his office the next morning. Claire warmly thanked Charles and happily left his office. The very next morning, Claire was back at Charles's office. Without much ado, Charles offered Claire the position of caregiver for Patrick. The job would come with a nice salary, double what she was making at the restaurant, and she would only have to visit and care for Patrick during the hours she had been working at the restaurant after classes. Claire was overwhelmed with joy. She thanked Charles profusely, but Charles was not done yet. He told Claire that since she had helped his father with the only money she had on her, he was willing to help her mother with his money. Charles immediately brought out a check for $20,000 and told Claire to use it for her mom's surgery. Claire couldn't believe it. She almost fainted with shock. She collected the check from Charles with shaking hands. Then she knelt down and thanked Charles. Even calling him a God-sent Messiah, Claire went home as soon as she could. And armed with Charles's check, she took Angela to the hospital for her open-heart surgery. With time, Angela fully recovered and was back to her old hard-working self. Claire returned to the city and continued her studies. While dedicatedly working as Patrick's caregiver, Charles was so happy to see Patrick's impressive improvement under the care of Claire. She was always very gentle and kind with the old man, who had immediately taken to her. With time, Charles fell deeply in love with the 22-year-old Claire. Her kindness, intelligence, and beauty hooked him. Claire was also gradually, but truly falling for the kind, handsome, and smart Charles. It happened very fast between them, and Charles and Claire were soon dating. And how much they loved each other. A year later, the lovebirds tied the knot. After the marriage, Charles gradually lifted Claire's entire family out of poverty. He rented a better apartment for Angela and Claire's siblings in the city. Then with his connections, he found Angela a high-paying job. Claire's siblings all went to the best schools. It was really a grass-to-grace story for Claire and her family, all thanks to Claire's kindness and Charles's gratitude and generosity. If you were Claire, would you have helped a homeless old man the way she did? And what do you think about this story? Thank you for watching this video. And if you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more.